civilian society, where the military, they all have to work together. But there have been problems with this before. How do we actually get the different stakeholders together to collaborate and trust each other?
Yeah, I have to say that you need to first of all look at what are the challenges, the humanitarian challenges today. And the humanitarian challenges today is first of all the scale and the multiplicity of the humanitarian challenge, together with the inability of our humanitarian system to respond. The main issues that concern us obviously is, first of all, the fact that the humanitarian crises are more diverse. So you have the conflicts, you have the natural disasters, you have the criminal networks and so on, all coming together on a scale that we have not seen before. And if you just look at some of the figures that have been thrown out, the latest figures that came out from UNHCR said that today we have 60 million people who are displaced. And this is the largest since the Second World War. And also there is a major statement from so many leaders that the humanitarian system that was based on just the United Nations, the traditional humanitarian players like the Red Cross and so on, that they are at breaking point. They cannot keep up with the number of crises around our world, and also the fact that they are transnational in so many ways. So obviously you need to have a very different system at play, and we already have seen the emergence of such a system. There are many more stakeholders that are not waiting to be called upon. You have local communities responding. We have seen how in Bangladesh the communities came together and helped with the shelters and so on when there was the kind of cyclone Zeta. You also saw the Aceh fishermen who responded in terms of the rescue of the Bangladeshi trafficked migrants as well as the Rohingya refugees, and the local communities making these people welcomed and treated them with great dignity. But at the same time, you can't just depend on the local communities as the first line of responders. You also need governments to come in, and obviously we have seen in the region when governments are accountable and they are effective and they're supported by partnerships, they can respond very effectively. And this we have seen in the case of the Indonesian government with the tsunami in Aceh in 2004, and also we have seen how many of the governments, for example, in China, have also responded to the earthquakes very, very effectively. The military is another player. And we have seen the way, especially when civilian capacities are under stress, the military has in fact come in, and we have seen this in the Nepal earthquake. We have seen it also in Aceh. Singapore has played a role. We have seen the role of the military even in the Pakistan floods as well as the Pakistan earthquake and so on. But the private sector is equally important. And although, as you say, that there may be differences in working methods and also in principles and even in a vision, but it is really trying to create a common ground. These are all new players, but they're essential players. So you can't just rely on the state. You just can't rely on the communities or on the traditional humanitarian system. You need new players to come in. So public-private partnership is one of the ways in which we have been able to see some innovation. A very good example is what's happening in Jordan, where the private sector has come together with the United Nations World Food Programme to give food coupons and also to help with food vouchers for the Syrian refugees to be able to buy food on their own from designated supermarkets. So these are all new ways of working, but there is a global citizenship that has also emerged, especially of the young, and they are IT savvy. they are IT savvy, and they are able to use their IT platform to have real-time information on where are some of the real-time damage and who's doing what and so on, including raising resources. So I think these are all areas that we should be encouraged by, because they, in a sense, are new ways of working that would complement the work of the traditional humanitarian system.
Response in the region, for example. Do you think Singapore is in any position to do this, given that we are so small, given that we don't actually have real experience on the ground with natural disasters on our soil? How can we either lead the effort or instigate this collaboration that you're talking about? Is it possible?
It is critical that you develop partnerships. The region is rich in knowledge, and the region is rich in expertise, and therefore at this particular day and age, I don't think it matters whether you are small or you are big, but it's whether you are able to harness the different stakeholders to share that knowledge and also to share resources, and if there's a way in which not just Singapore, but Singapore as part of ASEAN can actually coordinate the work, this would be critical. We have seen what ASEAN has been able to actually do, especially at the time of Cyclone Nargis, when ASEAN acted as a bridge of trust to link at that time the Burmese government to the humanitarian community in order to provide access to their people, and that was absolutely critical. But ASEAN, I think, has not pulled its weight sufficiently in many of the new issues, including, for example, what we saw recently with the crisis at sea, with the trafficking issue as well as the issue of refugees at sea. And there's a lot more that can be done, because in fact, even if you look at who are the people out of the 10 ASEAN countries, only 2 countries have signed the Refugee Convention.
That's great. Leading UNIFEM at one point, and just now you mentioned a little bit about the gender issues and how it needs to be more inclusive so that the elderly and women and children don't suffer. So given the scope of humanitarian assistance that is needed now, everything seems to be important. So in terms of disadvantaged communities, whether they're male, female, elderly, disabled, where do you think the focus needs to be on more?
I think you have to focus it on reducing vulnerabilities. The fact that out of the 60 million displaced people, half of whom are children, that's extremely worrying. And if you look at the people who are on the boats, who are being trafficked, most of them were women and children as well, extremely young children. And what type of societies are we creating today that people are just fleeing from their homes? Before it was young men who were fleeing in order to become migrants, to try to look for ways of creating a livelihood. But now increasingly, people are literally migrating en bloc as families. And that's a major concern. And of course, when it comes to women, the stories that we have heard, just horrific, because it's not just the ordinary beatings and so on, it's the sexual violence that's being used, and the way the children are being exposed to the violence is very, very destructive as well.
You are aware that things are happening, but it doesn't really sink in the scale. So given maybe that there's this program, or given what you already know, do you have hope that we can prevent more disaster, not natural, but make communities more resilient? Do you believe that we can work together?
The thing is that in Asia, we have some of the most climate exposed territories. Asia alone, a person living in Asia is 4 times more likely to experience natural disasters than, say, someone living in Africa, and 25 times more than someone living in Europe or in North America. So you just think of that. And also, even if you look at the number of the impact of natural disasters, even just in 2011, the region lost 293 billion US dollars alone. And so whatever development gains that we have made in rising Asia can be very quickly wiped off because of natural disasters. And this is something that we need to basically address, and of course to build resilience, to also make sure that we invest in disaster prevention and so on. But at the end of the day, it is absolutely critical that we actually address the root causes, and this is the climate change and threats to our ecosystem. And therefore, how do we ensure that as we grow, we are also growing in terms of a low carbon economy, but one that is high on poverty reduction, as well as addressing the issue of inequality. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is really inclusive and sustainable development.
But given the chase to the north, do you think that's possible?
Yes, because the thing is that we can grow, but at this current moment, I think the quality of growth is critical. And there are also new innovations, new technologies, new markets are being developed, and therefore, the more innovative we are in addressing this, the more prosperous we are. So at the end of the day, it's really building prosperity, but building it in a way that's more inclusive, and that's one that is more sustainable, and making sure that it is shared, that this prosperity is indeed shared.